Welcome to DejaVue.
It's your favorite Vue podcast. You just don't know it yet. And as usual on the microphones here, I'm with Michael Thiessen. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Yeah, also fine, also fine. And of course, today we're not alone here. No, we have some really interesting topics to cover with our special guest, Jakub Andrzejewski. How are you doing, Jakub?
Yeah, I'm quite good. And I'm quite amazed that you pronounced my last name correctly, which is not an easy task. So I'm pretty fine. I was looking forward to join this podcast and speak with you guys. I met you like a few times already on the conferences, so it is great to meet once again, but this time virtually and with our guests for the podcast.
Yeah, sounds great. So maybe why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, tell us what you're doing as a day job and a few affiliations. I mean, most of the listeners that are also into Nuxt might know that you're part of the Nuxt ecosystem team, but there's probably more to discover here.
Sure. So my name is Jakub, as you already introduced me, and I work at Monterail. I joined last, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, so it's quite fresh. And I joined as a Senior Frontend Developer. But I'm not only working as a developer in web development, but I also joined to help the company come back to the role of being very, very popular in Vue community. So it's both like development and marketing. So there is a lot of interesting initiatives for Vue and Nuxt we have in the pipeline. So expect to see them. And about one of them, I will be talking about today as well, which I'm pretty happy about. So apart from that, I'm also a Google developer expert in web performance. This is one of the topics that I really focus on while developing applications. And as you mentioned, Alex, I'm also part of Nuxt ecosystem team, where I help Nuxt grow in terms of maintaining the certain modules. You might know me from like security modules or integration modules such as Cloudinary or Algolia.
So the ecosystem team, that's something I'm not super familiar with. So there's the core team. So Alex is on the core team working on the framework. Does that mean like the ecosystem team is working with modules and like different maybe you can explain it better than I can.
Sure. So the thing is that the name for this ecosystem team was evolving throughout the years. It was first maintainers, then insiders, then right now it is an ecosystem team. So it was kind of difficult to name this kind of role purely because it is a mix of everything. Because if you are part of the ecosystem team, you can be maintaining modules, like open source modules for Nuxt that help the overall community of Nuxt have much more functionality than what just the core framework delivers, like, for example, the integrations or things like IATN, maybe integrations with other third-party services, like, for example, Prismic, the module that Lucy is maintaining. So this, I would say, is like the main job of a person who is part of ecosystem team. But also, if you're part of ecosystem team, you can, for example, be at the conferences, speaking at like Vue.js Amsterdam, Vue.js DE, and so on, speaking about Nuxt. So you somehow act like an ambassador for Nuxt. You can also be responsible for helping community in the discussions, like solving issues, answering questions. So I would say that the difference between the core team and the ecosystem team is that the core team is evolving the main framework and working with it, while the ecosystem tries to help the core team as well, but maintaining everything that it's like around the framework, where you cannot basically do everything. That's why Daniel, who is maintaining like all the idea for like open source part of Nuxt, he created this like core team of the people who are closest to him. And then he also created this another circle of people who are helping both him and other core team members to grow Nuxt, but not framework specifically, but more the ecosystem of plugins, modules, and the overall like vision and awareness of Nuxt as a framework. It's a really bit long answer.
Yeah, no, it's It's good. I'm glad that you talked about it so that we can like bring more awareness to the fact that there are all of these other roles in open source beyond just contributing code to, or even just, or even docs, which is more commonly people are aware of that. And so last week, Alex and I were at VueConf Toronto, and we did a panel, which you may or may not be seeing or have seen, depending on when things get published. And in that, I think it was Evan who brought up this idea that there's a lot of people contributing to open source, and they're not contributing pull requests, and they're not fixing issues. One example that he had was someone who just like takes an issue and does a really big deep dive and comes back with like this report on, the things that they tried. They looked at the code and did all these things. They didn't contribute code, but they did contribute a whole lot of value there. Or people who go through and like triage issues and organize things, and people who are in the Discord, like you mentioned, like solving things, or like people at conferences, there's like this whole ecosystem, right? I think that's a really good word for it. There's all these other people contributing to the project and making the project good and better, and like helping other people actually use the thing beyond just writing code.
100%. I also want to add there that like being part of the team is also interesting because it was closed, like not to say non-public for a while. And now for like, I think a couple of weeks ago, it eventually opened up. So like, okay, look, in the end, it's more of a, let's say, part of a recognition. So like, okay, you contribute to the ecosystem, so we want to invite you over so you can share stuff. But of course, people can also proactively say, hey, I'm building a module, I'll do cool things. Or Jakub, as you also said before, okay, I speak at a conference, but I'm very passionate about the project and I have more time. What can I spend it on? How can I help? And then in the end, be part of the ecosystem team. And there's so many ways to contribute. I'm really happy to also see that people are, let's say, rewarded in a way, even though it's, let's say, only with like, okay, hey, you're part of the team. It's no like monetary value on that, but just saying, okay, look, these are contributions, and in the end, they're valuable, and we all know that. But here you can see that that's the case. So really nice that this is public. That there's a really nice name for that. Yeah, as was also mentioned, the finding names is hard. We all know that. I think ecosystem team fits pretty well. And maybe coming from the Nuxt ecosystem, let's go a few steps backwards. I mean, you didn't start programming. It's like, hey, let's do a bit of Nuxt.js. So maybe briefly, how was your summary the summary of your story from getting started with programming, going into Vue.js, and eventually landing where you are right now?
Sure. So it was an interesting journey for sure, because I haven't started with Vue. I started with React actually, because at my university we didn't have that complex or advanced lessons in programming. We had like some basic PHP and HTML, CSS. So there was no something, let's say, modern for modern web development. So we had this kind of like student association where I joined, and we were using React there. And we are both learning and teaching at the same time, because there are people who are less experienced. So we try to help them as well. So my actual start was with React, not with Vue. But since I started it with React, I felt that something is not great there. That there are some things that just don't fit my style, let's say, of building web applications. And then suddenly I was looking through some, I don't know whether it was like LinkedIn or Twitter, probably LinkedIn. And I noticed that there is a website called Vue Mastery, which was actually my introduction to the Vue concept. And I remember like with all the details when I was building this very simple website with socks, like Vue Mastery socks, which was like a first introduction to Vue. And I instantly liked it. Like I like the syntax, I like the reactivity, I like the name, the colors, like everything fit perfectly. So I thought that this is my place to join. But the thing is that you don't always start already to contribute. You start using it, you use it in a project, 1, 2, or 3. And then you realize that there is something, but it's actually an open source, which is a big bunch of packages and tools you can use for a project. And if you start your journey with development, and specifically with Nuxt, you will just probably think that the guys who are building this kind of modules or plugins, they have to be some kind of like rock stars or magicians to build that. And you have to be in some way like unique, special, and great. But the thing is that everyone can build their own software and make it open source and make it public. So at a certain point, I thought to myself, maybe I will try as well. But let's just try it. It doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to be next like Vue.js framework. Let's try to build something simple.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a key that you mentioned here. Like, okay, just get started, like get your hands dirty. It's so good for learning, and like you eventually grow by putting yourself out there, right? Like being also able, like open for feedback. I have a similar story in the end where open source was basically my coding mentor. People reviewing PRs, people going through things like, hey, okay, we can improve this and that, or just reading, where you learn so much. So really, really nice to see also going the same way, so to say.
Yeah. So apart from that, I went to 2 companies where I stayed for a year. I stayed for a year. In the first one, it was actually a very interesting story. I talked to Evan about it, I think last year in Vue.js Live. We were basically building a software for television set-top boxes, which are those devices that are used to run like your TV and shows and stuff. So we were building software for this set-top box device. So we were using Vue.js to build all those, channels, streaming, picture-in-picture, stuff like that. So it was really interesting challenge to use web framework for that. And we were using Cordova under the hood to transform it into an Android application, because this device was actually running a certain version of Android. So it was a really interesting challenge. And I believe that when Evan was introducing Vue, he never thought that someone would use it for that. But hey, we did it.
And it was successful, right? So
yeah, it was working. It wasn't the most performant, because if you compare it to, for example, native solutions like embedded, it never can be the same. But still, it had a really nice UI. That's what we did. Was great. Then I joined a company where I was working in developing an e-commerce shop. And then after another year, I joined Vue Storefront, which is right now named or called Alokai, where I stayed for about almost 4 years. And right now I joined Montreal to do something with Vue as well.
Here we are. So when you said you started and came over from React to Vue, that was Vue 2, right? Like back in the time. How was the transition for you from like Vue 2 to Vue 3 in terms of the classic like composition API versus options API? Though you can also still just say like, okay, just bump the major versions, fine. But how did you feel that whole period of the ecosystem?
So first of all, I really like that the migration was done slowly. Like it wasn't that Evan just announced today that everything is going to be broken and we transition to a new version. At first, I wasn't really into Vue 3 and the composition API. I was a huge fan of options API and I really liked this interface. And I thought that the composition API reminds me too much of React. But honestly, when I started developing with it, I felt instant boost in productivity in terms of the things that I can do that basically work, and I have to do less work to make it work. In general, the new approach seems to be something that makes me more productive, especially if you join it or merge it with some great tools by Anthony Fu, such as the auto imports, for example. This is one of my favorite things in web development, is when you have the same result, but you have to write less amount of lines of code.
And it's still readable, right?
Perfect. It's still readable. It still works. It still handles some conflicts. So it doesn't mean that it will break. It handles conflicts smoothly. So kudos to Anthony for that and many other projects he built.
And would you say that now when, I mean, you also have like, for example, at your previous company, also right now, like new people getting onboarded, they learn Vue. Do you feel they have a hard time with the composition API, or do they even only learn the composition API at both APIs? Do you have any insights on that?
So I would say that if you are joining a Vue project that is already using composition API, I believe the syntax can be cleaner and easier for the newcomers to learn it. However, if you, as myself, for example, if you get used to the options API and you liked it, the transition might not be so smooth because there were things that were done very clearly in the options API. But still, as I said, I think that for the people who are joining the new project, which is built with Vue 3, it's, for example, much easier for them to transition from React, I believe, with Vue 3 than, for example, with Vue 2 or Vue 3 with Options API.
I think there's some level of like not being familiar with the new thing that you have to get over. So I had a similar experience with Options to Composition API, and I also started out with React and went over to Vue because I switched jobs. And at first using Vue, I didn't like it, but it was only because like I knew how to do the thing in React, and I would be like, well, I know exactly what to do in order to make this happen. But with Vue, I've got to like read through the docs and try something that didn't work, and then like Google some more things, and then eventually figure out how it works. And so it was more painful and harder to do. But once I learned Vue, I liked it a lot better. And same thing with the composition API. Once I learned it, I liked it a lot better. It's really hard to know, like, okay, do I not like this new thing, or is it just harder?
I will tell you one more interesting fact. When I was switching jobs and I was looking for a new one, in one of the companies, I needed to do a task which involved me, or basically needed to develop something in React, which I'm not proficient with. And it was a live coding session. And I wasn't prepared for it. So that was a really, really interesting challenge just to try making it work on StackBlitz or on CodePen, just from guessing based on my experience from 6 years ago when I first tried it. It was really, really interesting challenge, honestly, just to figure out in your head how it could work in React.
Yeah.
While you have everything in Vue, like things, for example, the templates, like looping over arrays in Vue in the template. This is done differently in React. Or
going with a little bit of
props.
JSX.
Yeah. So it was an interesting challenge, honestly, and it reminded me a lot of React, and it also reminded me why I am not a fan of this approach.
That's fair. It's very interesting though that like JSX is obviously not that popular, especially in the Vue community, though you can use it with Vue. And some libraries like Vuetify, for example, are doing that under the hood. And there is a new tool that I, like not that new, but tried out once again recently. It was called vue-vine, where you can basically write multiple components in a single file. And then you have still the Vue template. So it's not JSX. And you write like a little tag template function front. So you write like a vine and then the backticks and in there your template. And that's all in a function that is resembling your component. So I found it very interesting. Made a video about it. A lot of people were like, oh yeah, that looks so much like React. It's horrible. On the other hand, I hear so many people like, oh, why can't I add this tiny component in the same file because I don't need it anywhere else? And yeah, well, I guess there are a lot of different and interesting opinions there.
That's the one feature that I miss from React, is being able to create these like small one-off components that you can keep just like in the same file. You don't export them, you don't use them anywhere else, but you can have like these little reusable bits. And there's not like a great way to do that in Vue, but maybe in future versions there will be something. Who knows?
Well, at least with vue-vine it works well. Plus you get all the compiler benefits, so worth trying out. But I guess if someone says like, yeah, this should go into the core, then we have a big revolt in front. People with the forks and the torches.
And the torches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. But yeah, I also think I love single file components. Like I really enjoy using them. But exactly, this is the one downside. Where it's also like, hey, if we have, I don't know, 90% of single file components, also all cool. And then we have that one different format if you need it differently. Though then, of course, people start saying, hey, we already have 10 different ways of writing a Vue component. Do we need another one? And yeah, it's of course, it's very tricky. But on the other hand, luckily, with the Vue compiler at hand and everything, people can build these solutions for themselves. So it's all possible, which is once again so fascinating that you can see, okay, even if you use a different way of like besides render functions, besides JSX, but still using the Vue template syntax, and then compile it yourself with a plugin, it's pretty amazing work that has been happened there.
So we all have these different opinions on Vue, and if we want to share our opinions, there's a great place that we can go to do that. Am I right?
Yeah, so there is a very good place, as Micah suggested, where you can share what you like and how you use Vue and Nuxt. Because as I said, I joined Montreal, and right now at Montreal, we are doing another edition of State of Vue.js report that will be live beginning of next year, 2025. And right now, what is currently live is the survey that you can participate in and share your experience with Vue and Nuxt. And it's extremely important, not only for like Montreal company, but for every Vue developer, because it gives everyone information about how Vue is used, what are the tools, popular tools in Vue, what are the popular styling frameworks that are used with Vue, and so on and so on. So with State of Vue report next year, what you will learn is basically everything that is currently going on with Vue, with some statistics. Apart from just the survey, we will have case studies, migration from Vue 2 to Vue 3 and from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3, which are really interesting case studies. We will also have a section about Nuxt specifically. So there is a lot of interesting details that will be there that I cannot share yet. Like I cannot share everything yet, but I promise you it will be worth it to wait.
Sweet. So everybody who is ready right now, or after listening, or after I don't know, driving your car right now. So please don't just like put off your laptop now if you're driving, right? Do that afterwards. Fill the survey out, and in the show notes or in the description there's a link. But what I'm really curious about, I mean, I filled the survey already. I wonder why another survey. So we have like State of JS, which we mentioned in previous episodes, and also to everyone, that's also in the show notes. Again, if you haven't done that, fill it out and represent your favorite framework and podcast and content creators. So why State of Vue?
Specifically, just to know what things are currently going on in the Vue world. Because what you said is true, that you can also feel the state of frontend or state of JS. But the thing is that State of JS is very broad topic, right? You have multiple frameworks, multiple tools. And with the State of Vue, what we want to achieve with the community is to just get information about Vue, about Nuxt specifically, maybe some, as I mentioned, the case studies of interesting companies that are using Vue in production, and for what case studies or use cases that are using Vue, because I'm certain that they are using it for much different projects. Like each company is using it for something different. So it's also great to know how people are using Vue and what issues they have, because apart from just describing what case studies they are, we also mention what problems companies have or facing right now and how they solve it with Vue or how they solve it in Vue, because they might encounter it in while using it in the Vue applications. But in general, it's a really, really good resource of knowledge about the current state of Vue and Nuxt. So it's a must-have to read beginning of next year.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this also for myself as someone who does education, to sort of see if there are ways that I can change where I'm going, if there are areas that people are struggling with that I can, help out with. So I think, yeah, that'll be really interesting to see. There's like different questions here. I've been going through it a little bit on like, how are you writing components? And so that like, I think it's just interesting to see what other people are doing, because you only have the context of what your company is doing. Maybe you've got some friends who are also writing Vue, but like if you're just writing composition API, you don't know if there are other people writing options API, or are there people writing components with the class-based syntax, or has everyone just like moved on from that, And so it's really interesting to see all these different things and to get a better understanding of what the whole ecosystem is like and what people are actually using Vue with and how. Yeah.
And I guess it also, as you said, like it helps a bit to get the bigger picture, even though, like, for example, in my case, I see a lot of projects, but still these are a tiny subset, right? So you still, I don't know, maybe not even 1% of like the bigger projects. Also, these usually have some, let's say, problems, issues whatsoever, which is why I'm there to help out. So that's a good point. And also getting the bigger picture of like, yeah, which libraries, tools, and so on are used, and how happy are people with you, I guess. So when it comes to the survey, Jakub, do you have any insights on how the questions were chosen, of like basically how the whole survey was created from the base on?
Sure. So I joined, let's say, just in the moment of the survey being created. So I also contributed in creating those questions. So how we did it is we tried to get the most interesting questions, and maybe not the questions, but the topics that are currently, like, let's say, hot, right? So the frameworks, the plugins, the tools, how we use Vue, how long we use Vue in our projects. So I joined the company right in time for that, and I will be contributing a lot to just the State of Vue report next year. But apart from me, there are also few people from the company who are contributing to the creation of both the survey and State of Vue. For example, it's Szymon Licau, who is the engineering manager at Monterey. He's also contributing a lot to both State of Vue and the survey. And we also have other developers from the company that I haven't met yet, because this is my third week where I'm still onboarding, so I haven't met them yet, but I know that they were contributing, and they will contribute as well in the future for the State of Vue report. So it wasn't created by one person. It was also joint work with the marketing team, who were doing the initial research of the audience, of the questions we should create, and what topics we should cover, and how we can actually put these results of the survey into the overall State of Vue report. Because as I mentioned, State of Vue report will have the data from the survey, but it's only one chapter, and we plan 8 or 9 chapters, I think. So each chapter is something different, and the survey is only one of them.
Great. So that means we get a lot of data, a lot of probably also opinions from experts around the world, from industry leaders, from companies. So having a broad picture on the Vue ecosystem.
Hopefully, yeah.
That's the plan. Then it will be available online. What's the plan for distribution?
So in terms of the report, I think I would have to check, but I think that the plan is to make it live online, but also to announce it as well during one popular Vue conference that you might know, and you will be probably speaking there. So that's the plan.
Nice. Yeah, I remember that happened in the previous years, 2 years ago, something like that as well, and it was very exciting.
Yeah, so that's the plan. We will see how it goes.
Well, then once again, folks, fill it out. It's also like it's not that long. I remember I was done in 5 minutes or something, not even that.
Yeah, we value the time of the developers when we know that we don't like very long forms. So that's why we decided to select only this amount of questions, so that you will spend probably between 5 to 10 minutes for a survey, so that it doesn't take too much of your time.
Yeah, so once again, if you haven't filled it out yet, go fill it out, help us out, help everyone out, help yourself out, and we'll get some more data.
Exactly. And while you're on it, of course, State of JS, straight do it afterwards as well. It's all very helpful because in a way it's like, oh, you have all these surveys like Stack Overflow and the JetBrains survey and the State of JS and the State of HTML and CSS and the State of Vue and the State of Frontend. And yeah, I also understand it's like, okay, it's that time of the year again. We have to fill out our 20 surveys. On the other hand, of course, it's really important for the community, especially something focused like the State of Vue, to just figure out where a big part of the community stands on, and giving also other people reassurance, hey, we're doing the right way, maybe hearing something also about the future of Vue.js, how people in the community see that. So yeah, I think that's a good point here to make it happen. And from making something happen, there are certain things that we shouldn't make happen, which are, for example, issues with security. So coming from a very bad transition over, Jakub, you maintaining the Nuxt Security Module for a while. So I was mainly wondering, could you tell us a little bit about how that came up and why are you that interested and also experienced in terms of security?
Sure. So the interesting part about it is that I remember the exact day when I created this module, because it was on the way by train to Vue.js DE conference 3 years ago in Berlin, where I first met Alex. So I was getting a bit bored while I was in the train. I already finished my talk. So I had some time and actually surprisingly good internet connection, which isn't often in trains. So
especially
I thought to myself, maybe let's try to build something that haven't been done before, because this was what I was also struggling with, trying to build something unique. And I wanted to build it with my first and most liked framework, Nuxt. So I was looking for ways how we can, both me and other users who will be using this module, how they can get a benefit in terms of software quality, where they wouldn't need to do a lot of things. Because I honestly really enjoy working with software, with plugins or modules that just work. And this is a reference to this Skyrim presentation. It just works. But in general, it just works. So you find a module, you see that it provides you functionality that you would require in a project, and it comes with a set of defaults that will work for majority of projects. So you don't need to configure anything. It just works with, as I mentioned, the good defaults. But if you want to customize it, maybe your project has some more advanced needs, you still can do it. You can customize each part of it in a way that it doesn't require you to learn a new programming language, but it's configurable through properties like Boolean properties or string properties, or basically anything that you are familiar with while working with JavaScript or TypeScript projects. So then I thought to myself, maybe let's try to do something that my father is doing as his job, because he's like the security manager at his work. And I thought to myself, maybe let's try to build something that can be related to what my father is doing, because he was also always pushing me to go for IT, but he wasn't. He was sure that I won't be following exactly his steps, because he is like a born engineer, while I am developer. These are different terms, let's say, purely because he can, do stuff with computers, like open them up, fix everything inside, and close them up.
While like the hardware part, so to say.
Yes, yeah. While I work with the software, more or less. Mm-hmm. So I thought to myself, maybe let's try to merge my web development knowledge with his knowledge in terms of security and securing web applications, and try to merge it into something usable for the Nuxt and Vue developers, so that they can get something for free without any configuration needed. But if they want to configure it in any way, they can do it without troubles. So that was actually the born of the Nuxt Security Module, which aims to help and make your app more secure by default. So with the default setup, what you get is you basically the module configures your application to follow OWASP and OWASP top 10 recommendations. So in general, what OWASP is an organization that focuses a lot on improving security of applications, software applications. It doesn't necessarily mean that they focus only on web applications. They focus on applications in general, but they also have a big section about web applications. And for example, OWASP Top 10 is a document that is updated every 2 or 3 years, I think, where they list top 10 web accessibility risks, the most popular security attacks that you can get for your web application. So there are things like broken access control, rate limiting. Rate limiting is a way of protecting against, but in general, denial of service. I will be probably talking about it a bit more in a few minutes. But in general, these two things, like OWASP and OWASP Top 10, aims to help developers build more secure code, more secure applications. So what Nuxt Security does is that based on these recommendations, it configures your Nuxt app for you so that your Nuxt application is following those security recommendations. And basically, as I mentioned, without anything from your side, it makes your app more secure. So we get things like configured response headers, such as content security policy, for example. We get things like rate limiters or cross-site scripting protection, things like that, that all come by default when you install the module. And then you can configure everything, every part of it. Like if you have a rate limiter, it has some defaults, as I mentioned. But if you like it to work a bit differently, so maybe, for example, you want to, for certain endpoint or for certain subpage, like, for example, /login, we want to make the amount of requests to be lower than the default that is set by Nuxt Security, after which the user will be blocked from accessing the website. This is something like banning the IP address that, for example, is that the attacker uses to break our application.
I see, but so let's go in there, because I think maybe some people listening might not be aware of like what a content security policy is and so on and so on. But before we get into these terms, if you install the Nuxt Security Module, you said like cross-site scripting, and that's probably what a lot of people have heard about before, protection. It's not like you're magically protected against everything, right? So it will make it better, but the user itself still has to do a few things, not in terms of configuration, but well, not messing it up, so to say, I guess.
The general idea is that the user doesn't have to do anything, purely because, as I mentioned, it follows those good practices. But as in every software development project, there are different cases, different business needs. So that is why user can customize everything, like the value of certain response header, whether certain, for example, middleware should run in general. Like if you don't like the rate limiter that comes with Nuxt Security, you can also disable it completely so that you can get everything else but apart from this particular middleware. So the idea was to deliver something that will help majority, and for the minority that cannot benefit from the default preset, give them an opportunity to configure it in a way that it will eventually help them by customizing it, enabling, disabling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, given that like Nuxt also follows the philosophy in I would say Vue as well, of like sensible defaults and make it work for the 80% cases and like it'd be configurable otherwise. But circling back to the cross-site scripting, let's say you use the good old vHTML directive and you allow some user input, or like maybe even, I don't know, take the query string. from the URL. Is this also something that Nuxt Security would protect against and say, okay, even if you as a developer make that mistake, it will somehow intercept that and make sure it won't be able to exploit that vulnerability?
Sure, it will work for the second case you mentioned. It won't protect the cases like VHTML, but what, for example, this cross-site scripting protection does, it scans, it is a middleware that scans what goes to your server, like underlining Nuxt server, in GET and POST requests as either the body or the parameters. And if there is a code that is then considered as a malicious code by the package we are using underline to analyze the strings, then we are basically from this middleware, we are returning the appropriate response code that will give you as the user also information that something is not right. So if you are, for example, in development as a developer, you are passing some very long string to the form and you just want to see what will happen. And this string contains some malicious code like scripts or injections. What will happen is that this middleware will block this, it will intercept this request and it will block it from working actually. So it won't let this code come, for example, to your database or to other users that can have this code injected into the applications. So I always say that these solutions, they won't work in every possible case, but for sure they will work for certain cases, which is better than nothing, right? Because the alternative is that you don't install this module and try to basically implement those things by yourself, like trying to configure proper headers or trying to write some, for example, this middleware for late limiting. You can do it yourself, but you can also use module such as Nuxt Security and just configure it instead of trying to build this logic by yourself.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw recently there was some internet drama about this one indie hacker, this like popular indie hacker who created a boilerplate for building SaaS applications really fast. And the whole point of it was to ship fast.
That's what the name was, ShipFast, yeah.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, and basically the story, to sum it up, is he shipped a little too fast and there were a whole bunch of security vulnerabilities in it and someone was like hacking into it. And then I think someone created some websites that would just like give random people access to this SaaS boilerplate without having to pay for it, and like this whole thing. And like it's resolved nicely. This person, like they hired someone to help them fix a bunch of these issues. And so, yeah, I think it turned out well, but just sort of like a cautionary tale of security is important, and especially if you're building something that other people are then going to use. But yeah, like it's a whole separate topic. Like I don't know anything about security and like, you know, what response headers and things to do. And even if I do read up on it or get ChatGPT to tell me about rate limiting and whatever, like implementing all of that is a whole tedious chore that I frankly don't really want to spend time doing.
That's fair.
And so just install the module.
And from that point, I think it will be very good to also thank the amazing contributors that also contribute to the module, because it doesn't mean that I do everything by myself. I get a lot of help from the community members, and I can name one person specifically, Sebastian Refray, who is doing a lot of amazing work for the module, helping me in almost every pull request that is being created, every issue. So, but apart from Sebastian only, we get also different people contributing to the module. For example, there was Julian, who was also here in DejaVue a few episodes back. And there was also Jonas. I'm not sure if Jonas was here in the DejaVue, maybe another episode, we'll see.
Not yet.
But in general, yeah, I got a lot of help there. So it's not just my success. I'm really happy to share it and give credit also to people who did a lot. But Michael said,
very important. Sorry, very, very important. It's nice that you give credits there where credit's due. So I wish more people would do that, especially also in other communities, not to drop any names, but it's really nice to see that that's how open source works. Like, hey, we all work together and we all get credits for that. Is brought here. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah. So coming back, Michael, to what you said about this security risks, there is a really interesting security attack that was happening a few years ago. And it was actually discovered by Bug Bounty. For those of you who don't know, Bug Bounty is like the competition for, let's call them ethical hackers. So the people who try to break existing applications, but they don't do it to make harm. But companies, big companies, they create those kind of competitions to allow people to try to break the applications and get money if they found something and they fix something. So it's almost like getting open source developers and telling them, hey, come to our project and break it, and we will pay you for it. So there is a lot of movement there, and the attack was really interesting. And I believe this is something that we all developers, Vue, React, every developer should be aware of, because it's actually related to NPM, which is a package manager that we all use. So the attack was based on the fact that what attacker was doing is that he was creating the packages in public NPM registry with the names, exactly the same names as the packages that were available, but only from private registries. So let's imagine companies such as PayPal, Facebook, or Meta, Tesla, Netflix, that have packages, let's say Netflix AUF, right? That are only available if you log to the NPM, private NPM registry. So what this attacker is doing is that he is creating exactly the same names, but under the public repository. So you as a user, you just type npm install Netflix AUF, and instead of getting this Netflix AUF that should be installed from the private registry, from public registry instead. And what this code was doing is it was doing the so-called reverse shell, which meant that if you had this package installed, someone could fire commands remotely on your device. So very interesting issue that can happen to any of us. So review your packages and make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. And just one final note regarding the bug bounty, because as I said, those ethical hackers that are getting paid for that. The guy was paid around $150,000 for this, discovering this issue and delivering a fix for that.
Which is really on the upper end, though. Like, I mean, a lot of companies. So I think more companies should have bug bounties, absolutely, and should properly pay, especially for like these high critical like security vulnerabilities. And I know the big ones, like as you named before, like okay, Microsoft, has GitHub, they have NPM right now, right? Or like Google and Meta and Netflix, they all have these things. But also like some, let's say, medium to large enterprises should definitely do that. Just like, okay, hey, look, here's our guidelines. Here are like bug bounties that we definitely accept. Here are things like, I don't know, if I can count up the user IDs. Is this a security vulnerability? For some companies, it might be, and for some, it's like, no, it's fine. They're all publicly available. So I think bug bounties are really good things. I think ethical hacking is a way to go. So you don't have to, I don't know, you should still hire penetration testers, but there might be people like, hey, I'm an independent security researcher. I found a bug. Let's report it. I actually, that's a good reminder, I should file a bug bounty myself, because I think I found not a tiny thing, nothing too big. I might share. There's an update on that, and do a fully responsible disclosure. So like tell the company, not publicly post, hey, there's a bug. That's also another thing. But yes, it's a really good thing, and more people should do that.
Yeah, and I have one more interesting story here as well, because the issue I mentioned was primarily related to NPM. But recently, I think it was 2 years ago, there was also an issue with Shopify, the popular e-commerce platform. And the issue was that you were able to modify another person's shop without being an owner of it. Because certain part of the e-commerce platform of Shopify, where you usually check for access control, right? If a person can submit or do certain operation. In one particular place in the settings, where I think it was related to email notifications, you are able to change it to someone else's shop without being an owner of it. So what was happening is that when you were changing this email address, you are actually also becoming an owner of the second shop. So these kind of issues are extremely dangerous, honestly, if you can easily become an owner of someone else's shop.
Especially for stuff like Shopify, where you have like, I don't know, a gazillion of shops out there, and it's in every version. And like, okay, a privilege escalation is of course no fun. This is like huge. Plus the big issue, and now I think we circle slightly back to the boilerplate part, is Shopify can roll out a fix, and for all like hosted instances, it will be deployed ideally directly if you have like automatic updates on and so on. With boilerplates, it's a bit trickier. Like if you do mistakes like, oh, I didn't protect my API endpoints with a secret that you read in, and if you know the name of it, then I can just call them and like send a post request and I'm fine. Yeah, how many people build applications with a boilerplate and there's no like module like the Nuxt Security Module that you just like bump because it's a problem in the actual logic of the application of the boilerplate. People just use it or copy paste it. What then? That's a really tricky situation to handle. While with Shopify, it's a huge people affecting it, but especially when nicely disclosed, it can be fixed. If it's not sold as a like 0-day exploit in some darknet forum, that's great. So thanks to everybody disclosing these things. So yeah, that's definitely a different, let's say, level of issue.
Yeah. So I would also like to talk a bit more about the security in general, because as you, Alex, mentioned, and Mike as well, the Nuxt security works well, but in general, if we think about how by default this module works, it is about full stack applications, right? Because in order to be able to, for example, intercept certain requests that are coming to your Nuxt server, such as the rate limiting or cross-site scripting, you have to have a server, like actual server. So what if we don't have an actual server? Our application is a static site, like statically generated, or our application is SPA. So how should we handle security there, right? So the issue is that if we don't actually have an access to a server, our possibilities are quite limited, because majority of things require, for example, this middleware to work. But what we still can use, and this is also what Nuxt Security is doing as well. So this means that if your app is a single page application in Nuxt or a SSG, you still can use Nuxt Security. Honestly, and unfortunately, you won't get every feature of it, as I mentioned, because for some you have to have the middleware. But what you get is you get a content security policy through something that it's called, it's a meta tag with the attribute called HTTP equiv, which is like HTTP equivalent. And how it works is that you can get the content security policy that is usually a response header that is coming from your server to the browser, the client. So you can get exactly the same functionality as this response header, but in your single page or SSG application via the meta tag. This is not like groundbreaking and it won't protect you from everything, but hey, it's something, right? It's something that comes out of the box that can help your application be more secure. So in terms of securing like SP applications and SSGs, it doesn't only end on just like adding this meta tag, because I believe that right now a lot of functionality is being transferred from backend to the frontend. So we have full stack applications like Nuxt or frameworks like Nuxt, where we can basically, by using modules or integrations such as Supabase, such as Recent, we can basically use our front-end framework to build full stack applications without actually having any kind of backend knowledge, right? Because this is also the aim of tools such as Supabase and Recent, to allow front-end developers do what usually is done on the backend. So with this approach, where we are moving more and more functionality from the backend to the frontend, I believe that as front-end developers, we have to focus on the security aspects as well. But what I mean by that is that we should focus on being aware of security risks. If we are aware that there are situations where, for example, someone can get access to a certain website while he shouldn't be able to get this access, if we have this awareness, we know that we should protect our application against it. So we might think, oh, but my application is not, it doesn't have any confidential data, right? But there are cases, for example, when in your application you have a page that is only available for admins, right? And maybe inside this page, there will be something that is confidential. And you just thought, but no one will look at it, right? No one will say my website /admin, right? No one will do that. But the reality is that they will do that. So what I'm trying to say here is that we should all have this kind of mindset that we should be aware of issues like security issues. We don't have to always develop solutions that protect against everything, because it's quite difficult, especially that nowadays with the speed of the development, we have to focus on so many aspects. Like security is one software quality. We have performance, accessibility, SEO, maintainability, scalability, and probably 10 more to handle.
Shipping the actual feature as well.
Yeah. Exactly, doing something that works. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of things to take care of. So my honest recommendation would be to review OWASP website once in a while, just to see what issues are there. And just when you are developing something, just think whether your solution is protected against them. Maybe there is something you can do to make it more secure. Maybe there is something you can talk to your teammates, like backend developers, full stack developers. Maybe there is something that you can help them with by sharing this security knowledge.
Maybe in that case, before we slowly have to wrap up, like, are there a few things just top of your head that like, hey, as Vue.js developers, what are the things that is like clear signs of like, okay, we have to improve things here? What are like common things that happen the wrong way for front-end developers that they should improve? Like, oh yeah, these are 3 things you definitely should check now after listening to the podcast.
So I would say check out Nuxt security documentation because what me and other contributors tried to do is not only to put into this documentation only the information how to use the module, but also to make it a source of knowledge of how you can make your Vue application more secure. So apart from just how you can use the module, you also get the topics and guides about making your content security policy more secure, like more strict, for example, to basically be more secure. I lost the word. So for sure, check out that, because apart from these guides, we also have a FAQ where we also try to solve certain few problems there. We also have a good practices guide, which includes different tools that you can implement in your project. For example, a plugin for that scans your yarn log, for example, to see if you have some packages that have some security issues. So there's actually a lot of things that the contributors added to the module so that you can use to make your Vue app more secure. So that will be the first one. The second one, as I mentioned, OWASP and OWASP Top 10. It's a really, really good source of knowledge in terms of making your app more secure. And the third thing, I'm not sure if I have.
If you only have two, that's also fine. It's just like, I don't know, if you said like I have a Vue application, Nuxt application, then like, I don't know, a thing that I come across is in many applications, they use VHTML and to make sure, hey, whatever you use with the VHTML directive, it's sanitized, it's no user input, like these kind of nuggets where people are like, oh yeah, I just have to, I don't know, Command-Shift-F in my code or Control-F if you're on Windows, and then look for it and be like, okay, at least there I have no issues in terms of cross-site scripting. So if you have like some, let's say, straight away actionable things of like, okay, check these things in your code that you've seen before that might have some issues. If you have something like that, then that's a good chance.
I'm not sure if I have that specific things. Like what we also have in Nuxt security documentation and the good practices guide is, for example, with sanitization, as you mentioned, or basically just storing the actual information you need in your application. So, for example, if you're fetching a user profile, you don't need to fetch his password. Like, that's not a good recommendation, and store it in reactive view property, right? That it can be accessible from anywhere inside your app. Mm-hmm. So for sure that just review what information you're getting and how you're storing it. Maybe also to look at how you're handling your cookies, because this is something also what comes to my mind in terms of how it could be done in a bad way, that you are storing the cookies and then, for example, you are getting those cookies and you are, for example, sending them somewhere to a third-party service, let's say. So these are the things that you should check, but also they will be in OWASP top 10. I'm pretty certain, because apart from just the list of issues, OWASP also has a checklist for Node, for GraphQL, for SQL and stuff, where you can go through this checklist, and apart from just mentioning how you can solve certain risk or certain issue, they also give you like real examples of, for example, packages that solve certain issues. So I think that's the best recommendation I can give to the audience, is just use OWASP. It's a great source of knowledge. It's almost like web.dev, right? For example, for performance, for SEO and stuff. OWASP is that source of knowledge for security.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing all these tips and your insights on security. I know that I need to go install this module on my projects right away and make sure that everything's secure. And yeah, you've given me lots of things to think about. I'm going to have to check out this OWASP and see what that's about. Do you have any other last things you'd like to share? Where can people find you online? Do you have anything you want to plug or have people check out?
So if you want to find me, I'm on X and Blue Sky at Jakub Andrzejewski. I'm also on LinkedIn and on GitHub. The difference is in GitHub, I'm at Baroshem. It's a bit different name. But if you type my first and last name, if you can manage to pronounce it correctly, you will find me as well. But my final note would be what I always try to motivate people to do is to contribute to open source. As I mentioned, the Nuxt security wouldn't be there without the community contribution. I know that it's not perfect and there are still a lot of things that can be done better. And it's the same for everything we do, right? For Vue, for Nuxt, there are still things that can be done better in a different way. So my final, let's say, note would be that if you are considering to contribute, stop considering and just do it. You will enjoy it for sure.
Yeah, that's lovely, like ending to the episode, I would say. Mm-hmm. So, Jakub, thank you so much for coming on, telling us a little bit of the state of Vue, security, how you got into Vue and Nuxt and open source. And we'll hope to have you back on later on, because there's so many more things to cover with regards to security. We could go on for a couple more hours, I think, but time is running, time is flying. So for everyone listening, of course, check out all the older episodes. Some are linked in the show notes together with all the links to the surveys. And if that's not the most recent episode, then there's straight one after that. So yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and hope to see you next episode. And thank you, Jakub, for being around.